Hello, good morning. Welcome to Sunrise Daily Today. I'm Chamberlain Uso.
Good morning. I'm Maupe Ogun Yusuf.
Good morning and welcome. I am Bukola Samuel Wemimo.
Today is March 22. Yes, we're back to that again. I'm Ayo Makinde. Good morning and welcome. Now, it would seem like the Vice President was looking into some kind of crystal ball as far back as 2019, May 26 to be precise, when he said at a meeting, for too long we have been seeing what seemed to be a policy of polarization of the nation along primordial fault lines of ethnicity and religion. The result is that we have been indulging in the highly risky things of dancing in chaos, and we do not know how long we can continue to get away with it. But the handwriting on the wall is clear for everyone to see that no condition is permanent, certainly not the present state of our nation. He wasn't the only one at that meeting who made that comment. A clergyman Onayekon also said the same thing, saying that, look, let's ensure that we do not permit anyone to take advantage of the country's fault lines. Our days will be better and better, that's the Vice President. This is the reason why I am so confident that we have to work towards reconciliation. Now, fast forward 4 years after, well, almost 4 years after, it would seem like those fault lines are being taken advantage of by us, by ourselves, whichever way we want to look at it, because the build-up to the election, the campaigns or, rhetorics on social media, even on the street and everywhere, along ethnic lines, along religious lines, in politics, it's been a very, very discomforting mixed bag for us. Meanwhile, in the coat of arms, I keep referencing it, it's not just words. Unity and faith, and not just faith as a religious thing, but faith in the nation, peace and progress. If only we had focused on that towards the elections, I'm not sure we'll be where we are right now.
Not at all, Ayo. And I'm on all fours with the Vice President here, because those fault lines are not just ethnic and religious fault lines, but fault lines of danger, fault lines of violence, especially if we went by some of the things that happened during the presidential and National Assembly elections, and even the governorship and state assembly elections, where some people were attacked just because of their political affiliation, which was closely related, to ethnicity and tribe. So, Nigerians must remember that our common aspiration for self-actualization, our common needs for self-sustenance, food, the basic necessities of life.
Food, shelter, clothing.
They know no tribe,
sentiments.
no sentiments, so we must rise above all of that. However, there is a need to balance that with, the need for equal representation of all in the groups, of all ethnic groups, of our diversity in the country, nationwide. Now, this, I believe, is due to a lack of heroism for quite a long time, in the leadership space. We need leaders who can help us to truly aspire to a common sense of being Nigerian. Malkwe and Chamberlain.
Indeed, Buki, I think that you're emphasizing something that I have thought long and hard about, and I think I also had the opportunity to express yesterday as we wrapped up the 2023 verdict, especially for the state elections. It's a beauty to see that we will not be having that for at least another 4 years. Yes, there'll be off-cycle elections, but nothing of that scale until the next 4 years. And I know that, for a number of people, there's mixed feelings. For some people, utter disappointment. For some people, victory. They're happy with what has happened. But whatever it is, wherever it is that you lie along the spectrum, we do know that if there's anything that this election showed us, is that all is not well in the land, and that, there needs to be a reconsideration of certain things. Things that we have let fester for too long, fears that we have harbored. We've let people play on those fears, magnify them and make them bigger than they ought to be. And these people have manipulated these things to their own advantage. It's not because of you and I. It's not because of that. But as a result, if we've realized what has happened, then the onus still lies on us to demand of our leaders good governance. It lies on us to say, look, we can rise above this. We can move beyond this. And in almost every there are so many instances where we have done this, where we have moved beyond this in the past. I mean, for instance, the Yorubas, knowing that they have different dialects, knowing that they have different, customs and cultures. I mean, we know that it's not just one group of people called Yoruba. There are different dialects, the Jabus, there are many people who identify under that big umbrella, and they have of different religions, so that they had to come up with a concept called the Omoluabi concept. Many years ago in Lagos, I lived in Lagos, and there was something called the Spirit of Lagos. I think it was a campaign started under the Fashola government at the time. Because people now need to have a new identity. If we live in a place as cosmopolitan as Lagos, it cannot be, that even Abuja here in the Federal Capital Territory, where it's supposed to be a melting pot, in many more cities are developing along that line with so many more ethnicities. There needs to be a new identity for these people. The young people we have seen come out in this election did not come out, because they of a certain faith or they're of a certain ethnic group. No, they came out because they identified certain values. So it is those values now which we must seek to build, which we must seek to, raise as a standard by which we want to identify new Nigerians across board, be they from the north or from the south. There needs to be a new vision for this country. If it already existed, let's go and unearth it. Let us dust it up. Let us buff it and shine it for all to see, to say this is what we aspire to. And anything that falls short of this will be unacceptable in our land. So I believe, yes, a lot of people are really disappointed and are really hurt, but I still believe that there's hope. And it starts from when we realize that there is work to be done, and we all brace up to help carry out that work in whatever role that we occupy, in whatever office we find ourselves. Chamberlain.
Speaking about hope, I was just scouring and just trying to find out, because there were several other people who were here in the country just observing our elections and what we did, how we conducted ourselves. And, when everything just looked gloomy in many areas, you just try to see, okay, what do lots of people even think about all of this? Anything for us to build on? And then I came across this Pan-African Women Project, an international non-governmental organization of African women from 54 nations of Africa and the diaspora. They've got their head office in Joburg. They observed elections in the country, in different parts of the country. And I saw the part where they spoke about the elections in the country, much as, yeah, so many people were disappointed. But they also said that, from their own words, in one of the summary of what they put out there, where they said, from their perspective, the 18th March 2023 Governorship and State House of Assembly elections in Akwa Ibom State meet international recommendations of free, transparent, and peaceful conduct of electoral process. Yesterday, we saw EU and some part of them talked about early arrival of materials, how they thought we could build on some things there. So, but if you look at that compared to all the other scenarios where lots of people expected the commission to perform differently and how we conducted ourselves, I think it leaves a lot to be desired. So those are some of the things we'll consider here. And my colleagues were talking about how many people were going to move on, different offices. Now, they now have to come together and see what to do. But these are some of the things we'll consider here today on the program. So as much as so many things didn't go as much as you or several people expected. But yeah, just look, we'll try and see how we can look on the bright side of things so that you don't get all gloomy about things and then it affects you moving forward. I can highlight
one for you. You know, I had the opportunity to speak with the outgoing, she's leaving in a few weeks, the U.S. ambassador to Nigeria. And she was saying when you look at the larger West African context, the fact that we can take it for granted that at the end of every 4 years, we're going to have elections. It's something that we must not take for granted. We cannot just sweep it under the carpet. That a lot of other African countries are not taking that. Yeah, some people will say, come on, that's too minimal. But it's something, because in some other African countries, there are coup d'etat. Yeah. There's, the leaders are seeking to elongate their time in office, change the constitution to suit them, so it might be small, but at least the fact that we know that elections will happen, we can almost take it for granted that, people will prepare for elections. She says it's something at least we can be proud of.
I mean, yeah, I couldn't agree more. It is something because, I mean, we go to places with our African colleagues, journalists as well, and we hear the narrative that come through from those countries. Well, people may argue that, yeah, but it's a little thing. But so you can imagine if one despot just comes in, then we'll all be at each other's throats, fighting that to see how long it will take us. So it is something, really. But we know we could do better than what we did. So those are all the issues out there, which we'll focus on moving forward. So we appreciate little things so that God doesn't get angry with us. So we'll just go right on and take a look at some of the dailies here for you. We'll start with Daily Trust. Governorship polls. Defeated candidates reject results in Kano, Lagos, Bauchi, Delta, others. Urge supporters to remain calm, head for courts. Protests rock Ogun, Nasarawa, Abia. Politicians must be ready to prove their cases, lawyers. So there's a lot of work for security agencies. They need to stand up and be counted now. They need to ensure that things are done, because at the end of the day, we know politicians will take advantage of the fault lines in the country. We know that there will be a lot of people that they could use who are pliable, very pliable, but we also should know that we will have a country that needs to be a country for us to move forward. Not that all their actions are excusable, but of course there's so many that are that we need to call out there and ensure that they do what they are supposed to do, what they are meant to do. We'll keep doing that. It doesn't matter what anybody thinks. That's what we're here for. And then you see at the bottom street, 4 hurdles Zamfara governor-elect scaled to unseat Matawale. Governor imposes dusk to dawn curfew. Same thing in Kano. They imposed a curfew last time, so I think it's not all done. People still suspecting, look, you need to be careful where you go, what you do. Everyone, all hands. It's a cliche now, isn't it? But that's Daily Trust this morning.
Vanguard Newspapers has this. Tinubu sues for peace, condemns ethnic slurs, election violence. Says it's time for national healing. Tinubu's call for healing after unleashing violence hypocritical, says Atiku. So you see the response right there. Page 5 is where you find details. Nigeria points way towards democracy. In region, it's scarce. That's according to the Washington Post. I'm looking at the Vanguard newspapers for you this morning, as in its story. Nigeria points way towards democracy. In region, it's scarce. That's according to Washington Post, which very much falls in line with what the U.S. ambassador was saying, that in the West African region, where coup d'etats are beginning to happen, Nigeria can at least say it has a democracy. Those aggrieved should go to court. That's according to the Sultan. That's now becoming a slogan of some sort, go to court. But that's what the Sultan, that's what you're supposed to do in a democracy. If you're dissatisfied with the results, that's where, redress is allowed, not on the streets. So by all means, let us hope that the judiciary will be able to cope with the plethora of cases that's going to be faced with.
A lot rest on their shoulders now.
Indeed, Chamberlain. Page 5 is where you find details. Look at this on top of the nameplate. It's not over in a number of states. Anxiety heightens over Enugu Abia governorship results. Page 11 is where you find details. CBN admits weak links in cash withdrawals, raises policy rate. It's on page 19. Kaduna train attack, federal government docks terrorist negotiator Mamu on 10-count charge. And look at that. Constitution review, Buhari rejects bill on power to summon president, governors. Pose, U.S. plans new visa ban on electoral offenders. What I find interesting about this is that much as they might plan that, they never let us know. You just get to hear in the rumor mills that, oh, this person has been banned, this person has been banned, but they never say who, who really has been banned. They say it's confidential. We'll leave it there for Vanguard newspapers.
And flip to this Nigerian newspaper. This Nigerian newspaper has for you this morning something a little bit different from the elections. It would rather go the way of, focusing on the fight against crude oil theft. And this is the way the lead story is captioned. FG prosecutes over 220 vessels involved in maritime criminality in 5 years.
Whoa.
Arrests 87 oil tankers involved in crude oil theft. Recovers 15 million liters of petrol, diesel. I wonder why that hasn't had quite, a lot of impact on, our crude oil sales in recent times. Of course, there's been reports of the number of barrels per day going up, of sale of number of barrels per day going up. But then again, there should be a more accumulated in terms of, foreign exchange in this regard. But,
I'm expecting that this story will have a lot more details, because 87 oil tankers, how many liters or cubic meters or whatever of crude oil are they? How many millions of barrels of crude oil are they? And then when it says, excuse me, that the federal government recovered 15 million liters of petrol and diesel, those are not made in Nigeria. They are imported, at least for now, unless there is something going on that we are not aware of. So how did that happen? Those are, questions to answer. Hopefully, page 4 has the details.
Amid crude oil theft, there isn't also theft of the imported liters of petrol.
Exactly. So
tanker-laden liters of petrol belonging to Nigeria. That would be a more monumental disaster than what we're already experiencing. But so many questions to be asked around this big story from the front page of this Nigeria, and we hope that in the coming days we can take a closer look at it through the eyes of practitioners in the oil industry. A check on politics now. Just beneath that big story, you'll find this one, a reaction to the victory of the governor-elect of Rivers State. Fubara's victory reaffirms Rivers as PDP's stronghold. That's ascribed to the incumbent, Governor Wike. And right under that one, there's this: fire raises on Onitsha market, destroys goods worth millions of naira. And lastly, from the front page of This Nigeria, LP officially challenges Tinubu's victory as president-elect. Of course, the presidential candidate of the Labour Party has filed a petition against his victory, and I believe the PDP has done same in the last 24 hours. Take a look at the rider under this. Party supporters besiege Enugu INEC office, say Edioga won as protesters call on commission to declare OT, that's the governorship candidate of the Labour Party in Abia State, to declare him governor-elect in Abia. So those two states, the commission has suspended collation of results from there due to a number of challenges. We hope that the conflict there will be resolved pretty soon to assuage the fears and worries of party supporters and the voters who have voted in different candidates. Let's leave it there for This Nigeria newspaper.
Leadership newspaper has this one on its front page, and it's like charging the president. 68 days to hand over. Remove fuel subsidy before you go. U.S. government tells PMB. Well, it's not an order, so it's the council, it sounds like. President takes stock, says, I've addressed insecurity, separatist agitations, oil theft. No. Yeah, that's on the front page. If you're not sure, go into the paper. The story itself is on page 4. For those of you who've been asking, what's going to happen? How can the governor of a state run the state without a first lady? Well, the answer is right there on the front page of the Leadership newspaper. Benue governor-elect says, I don't need first lady to govern, as experts explain why Matawale, Omagege, Abubakar, others lost. Now, there's a quote right there beside that picture of the clergyman. Father Alia has been a priest for over 32 years, so governing Benue State without a first lady will not be a challenge to him.
Well, that's a lot of resources that will be saved, Ayo. There won't be an office of the first lady.
I am protesting on behalf of the women.
I am the one that's supposed to be protesting
I'm
on
protesting
behalf of
right
the
now.
first lady.
I'm he for she.
I'm a she for she. But that's a lot of resources that will be saved.
Oh, wow.
Nonetheless, it can be created. Anything can happen. The Reverend Father can decide to, revoke his oath now and get married.
Well,
I'm sure Benue citizens will,
as a result of what Bukola,
too glad to provide him
as a result
a
of what Bukola has said, that's the Leadership newspaper this morning. Markwa and Chimele, you may want to respond to that.
Well, yes, you guys be careful with what you ask for. If they say he wants a first lady, if he gets a first lady now, and the first lady, some first lady go and contest election now, you people won't vote for her. And then everybody keep asking, they want this.
Big questions.
What's wrong with people?
As to what we want. We say, the office of the First Lady is not constitutional. The president, I think President Buhari tried to downplay that and say, my wife only belongs in the other room. And people were angry at that. And we say, she's wife of the president, she's not first lady. Later on, we reintroduce it. Now they say, how are you going to govern without a first lady? Please, what parts of our rules says that you need a first lady to govern?
Look, let's just try and learn to focus on some right and key things.
Are we going to discriminate against single men?
I just wonder. Because there are so many more very responsible single men, way much more than married folks. So you don't have to be married to be respectable in society. We know it has its place, but look, it's not a yardstick. If I say it's not an achievement now, it'll come for me. But let's take a look at the Guardian.
Yes, we'll come for you.
Look at the Guardian. Operating license, not a right. Emefiele wants banks chiefs. I'm still thinking about what I said or what I was going to say. But look at the riders now. As CBN tightens credit squeeze, raises interest to historic 18%. NPR in sync with economic realities, experts argue. And then there's so many other parts of the riders here. You see here, CBN has taken steps to insulate local banks from risks. Emefiele assures so much about the banking sector, but we know that they can do way better. than they are now. And I think everybody has now seen that infrastructure, the cashless policy or the infrastructure to support it, we know how challenged it is. So we wonder what they're doing about it, because they charge us so much. These banks, everywhere you turn, there's a charge. If they could charge you for entering the bank and breathing the air, who knows? They might, but...
We should call out a few banks, you know, Chamberlain. Some banks have been really awful.
It is terrible.
This a couple of weeks, you know, almost months, as a matter of fact. We need to ask, for instance, Zenith Bank, what is going on with your banking platform? What are people doing about it? What's going on?
So many complaints, really. So many complaints.
At least that's what I know of. I don't bank there, but I know people who do, and they really need to work on their e-platform. Look at this. New Telegraph is the lead has this as a lead story. Presidential poll, OB, Labour Party, APM, AA file petitions against Tinubu, APC's victory. That's a lead story there. Yes, it's now official. They've taken the matter to court and they've made their requests of the courts. OB, Labour Party, APM, AA file petitions against Tinubu, APC's victory. Obi queries credibility of delayed Enugu Abia Guber poll results, expresses shock at Nnamani's ethnic bigot label. Pages 2, 7, and 28 is where you'll find details there. Look at the bottom of the paper. They also have this. U.S. condemns violence, voter suppression during polls. Pages 3, 4, and 5 is where you find details. On top of the nameplate, Nigeria's e-payment fraud hits 9.62 billion naira in single quarter. Okay, so while we're also asking the e-payment platforms to work, we also have to be careful of e-payment fraud. Now is the time to really guard your details, you know, guard it jealously, protect it with everything that you have. Page 3 is where you find details. Still New Telegraph that I'm looking at. But let's leave it there for the paper.
And flip to Daily Independent. Daily Independent also leads with politics this morning. And this is what it has as its lead story. Atiku tackles Tinubu over call to begin healing process. The first of his riders says, frowns at his silence as Ndibo are being threatened in Lagos. Well, he's made an official statement now calling for the healing process to begin. But perhaps he would need to do a little more than that, following the comments attributed to some of his supporters in Lagos amid the governorship elections in Lagos State, knowing full well that he's a leading, political figure in Lagos, and everything that he says as president-elect and leading political figure in Lagos will count a lot. So he might have to do a little more than call for healing process, but also check the excesses of some of his supporters in Lagos who have, called for all sorts amid the governorship elections. Going a little further down, just before we exit politics, presidential election, nullify Tinubu's victory, Obi tells court. Atiku files petition challenging Tinubu's victory. Take a look at other stories on the front page of Daily Independent. PDP screens Ihedioha Anyanwu Diri for Imo Bayelsa Guber poll. So we're looking ahead now to the off-cycle elections after this, successful is a debatable word now, conclusion of the presidential, National Assembly, governorship and state assembly elections in the months of February and March. Just a few more stories before we exit Daily Independent this morning. 250 lawyers, that's going a bit closer to the bottom strip on your left-hand corner. 250 lawyers ask NJC to direct courts to reject EFCC cases. There's a little more to that story, but if you're interested, you'll have to find details inside page 6. But the writer says a bit more. Say Bauer can't enforce anti-corruption laws as a convict. So the last is yet to be heard about the contempt of court issued on the EFCC boss. Let's leave it there for Daily Independent this morning.
Where Daily Trust has this one on its front page. Let's run through it right quick. Governorship polls. Defeated candidates reject results in Kano, Lagos, Bauchi, Delta. Others urge supporters to remain calm. Head for courts. Protests rock Ogun, Nasarawa, Abia. Politicians must be ready to prove their cases. That's ascribed to a lawyer. Find out which of them on page 4 of the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. Several other stories are making the rounds. 4 hurdles. Zamfara governor-elect killed to unseat Matawale. Governor imposes dusk to dawn curfew. Stories are on the inside pages. And of course, CBN's MPC raises interest rate to 18%. That's the Daily Trust newspaper this morning.
All right, then that ends it. We'll look at some of the dailies here today. We will be back in just a moment. Stay with us.
The Saturday, March 18th governorship and state assembly elections across 28 states are over as the electoral umpire declares winners in most of the states.
2023 governorship election.
The exercise was not devoid of drama and disputes as the opposition fought the declaration of results in some states, such as Kano, Nasarawa, Kaduna, and Ogun states.
The Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, established to be an impartial body, acted otherwise on 20th March 2023, when it unlawfully declared and returned Abba Kabir Yusuf of the New Nigerian People's Party, NNPP, as the winner of the election in suspicious circumstances.
2 words alone was uttered and inflated to beat us by surprise, or by hook or by crook, after results were collected and known from our respective polling unit. So we are not surprised that anyone who wants to occupy your place can do anything.
Although some are taking to the streets to protest their displeasure over the outcome, others are choosing the option of seeking legal redress.
We are going to stay here until we are addressed by the officials of INEC. And our contention is that the measures by which other states have been treated and they are allowed to have runoffs, Ogun State should be measured in the same vein.
So many irregularities, but petitions have been written on them, and to the extent that they are material and they may affect the outcome, I'm sure the regular INEC will look into this.
What we saw yesterday was a bureaucracy, thuggery, hooliganism at its finest. A government by the thugs, for the thugs, by the thugs. And this cannot be acceptable. It is a wrong precedent to set, because the next time people want to participate in elections, they will believe it must be violence, it must be war.
We've seen how the TPEX, some of our result sheets, where we've got 403, the TPEX is 0, it turned into 43, is everywhere. And some like that, you know, and all of this. But we understand how this is. We've collected enough evidence for us to enter the next process.
In some states, the outcome of the exercise is greeted with violence, even as some of the candidates try to calm their supporters.
The election in Bauchi State was characterized by primitive violence. We consider the figures that were released as totally unacceptable.
The party therefore wished to oppose the outcome of the election as announced, while urging our members to remain peaceful and calm as we study and review the result before taking appropriate action.
As candidates in states where election results have been announced as sorting themselves out, the fate of governorship candidates in Abia and Enugu states remain undecided as INEC suspends the collation exercise in the states.
All right, welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Yes, indeed, we'll be picking up on the elections, just taking a look at several recommendations, what transpired, how do we proceed moving forward. So we do have Idayat Hassan, Director, Center for Democracy and Development, as well as the NOB Convener, Situation Room, and Country Director, Action Aid. Good morning. Thank you both for coming on today.
Good morning.
Oh, what a grueling time it was for lots of people. Journalists, observers, Nigerians, everyone. I mean, come to think of it, journalists actually have gone through a lot covering these elections across the country, the responsibility they have on their shoulders. It is huge. And I do hope companies find time to do something about mental health of journalists, because it is actually very, very important. And it's not talked about in many quarters, but I tell you, it is important. You know, like the proverbial saying about the lizard who falls and nobody presses them, they do that themselves. So just to put that on the one hand. Well, I'll start with Idayat. I mean, yes, we've seen recommendations that CDD has put out about these elections, but what particularly strikes you? Because this is not the first of the elections. I mean, even before these elections, I know that both groups of yours, you did your analysis, you met with the commission, all of those projections were all there, but the elections came, many of them have gone because still awaiting results for some others. So what would you say was the key thing that struck you, whichever way?
I think it's really an interesting one for me. On one hand, I saw an improvement from the February 25th elections, which must clearly be acknowledged. If only this March 18 elections was as managed as the February 25th elections, all this dashed hope that is actually beclouded this whole electoral contest wouldn't have been. But what is striking is actually the role of institutions and the recognition that when you actually run elections, this beat we keep talking about, that elections is actually a stakeholders affair. It involves us, like you have said, the journalists, the media, the civil society, but importantly, the institutions of government, the Electoral Management Commission, but also the security agencies and other relevant institutions. So on one hand, while you can talk about improvement in the elections, in the management of the elections, you saw that it was blighted by violence, voter suppression, voter trading, all taking place at times in the presence of these institutions that should maintain law and order. At the same time, we saw that in the inadequacy which we kept flagging in terms of the deployment of security also played a huge role in accentuating some of these challenges. While important, everybody was a victim in these elections. Voters were victims because of their inability to exercise their franchise, or the fact that some of them were beaten or maimed in the course of the elections. We saw the attacks on journalists. We saw the attacks on civil society. INEC itself were not actually left out, inclusive of the security agents. Now, Nigerians collectively, institutions, all became victims of political brigandage orchestrated by like 3 layers of people. Non-state actors, think in terms of all those vigilantes, Yankasai, bandits, on one hand, political thugs, and even political agents who were supposed to be at the polling unit to watch the votes.
I'm just wondering, because, my colleague has talked about how journalists are affected. I know that, CSOs too, you guys have been on your feet before the elections, during the elections, and after the elections, you still have to write lengthy reports, such as the ones we're looking at. I'm just a little curious sometimes when you observe at the polls and you see that things are not going as they ought to. and your job only is just to observe. You cannot even say, oh, you can't do that. No, that's not allowed. You can't even call people. I mean, do you feel sometimes powerless? Do you feel inhibited? You know, and asking yourself, are you sure we really cannot do more if we see things going wrong? Madam Eniobe, I want you to respond to that.
Thank you very much, but I'll also go back to Chamberlain's question of how you feel about the whole thing. And, you know, you have said before the election, it's before, during and after. There was a huge preparation. The last 2 years, it's like nobody has been resting. Both the media, starting from the Electoral Act, the movement towards getting that enacted, and the disappointments, and then the victory that came because of the issues of technology, where there was a lot of preparation. And so you were looking at, for the last 2 years, you are looking at, will there be a gap here? You notice the gap, you nip it on the board. Because of the off-cycle election also gave us a lot of opportunities. And I think both the media, nobody has been resting because we wanted the best for Nigeria. If you want to look at what really happened, because the preparation, the trust, there was trust deficit. But during, as we were going into the election, we built that trust, working with INEC and all of the stakeholders and the civil society organizations and development partners. Everybody's hands was on board, on deck. And the granting of so many press conferences, I don't know how we have been tearing apart, you know, the media, come here and do this and do that. And so we continued. And then we came to the election. One of the major, the trust deficit was also from the young people because of technology. And then the investment on technology. And then come the February 25th, presidential and National Assembly elections. And I'm particularly, you know, if you personal, heartbroken. And with many others, you know, if you think you are depressed by some of the things that happened during the election, then you see so many Nigerians who are also so depressed because of the conduct of the election itself. If you look at, in comparison with the 25th February, about 30% of polling units opened, you know, from the places where we deployed observers. But you find it on March 18th, about 70% opened, you know, on time. And so, but what's the effect? And I think that's where one will say, okay, there is improvement here, but what's the effect of the improvement? On 25th of February, many polls were not open, but whatever happened then, you know, there was the issue of complete logistics disaster. It was a disaster because we saw that coming. If you see how INEC, because of all of the readiness, you know, all of the readiness and what happened before, you would think, you know, some of the things that ought to happen, you know, will be tackled. If you start deployment by, you know, if you don't do deployment by Thursday, you know you have failed already. Because he who failed to plan, plans to fail. But what really was responsible for that failure is something that we need to look at. But I'll come out. So for me, because of the preparation that we had, it was a total disaster. And the reason I'm saying that is that there were promises. All of you were there. The promises that were made by INEC, we will upload, you know, the results real time. And that is what, so transparency and accountability was carried into the election. So we were so hopeful, but what has come out of it is what really, so the trust deficit.
We will compare notes in a moment. I mean, in terms of, you know, what went right, because some people will say that there was an improvement from the, we saw some things, as you said, the polls opened much earlier, you know, IREV worked this time around, yet it would seem that the results are not exactly what we were hoping.
So it comes out to talk to you about the, you know, the management of the election itself.
So we'll talk a bit more about that. Let me quickly take this to Lagos now, because I know my colleagues will also have lots of questions for you ladies here. Bukola and Ayo.
Yes, thank you, Malkwe. I'd like to begin by asking Madam Obi, you know, some questions. I read your report, and your report throws out a lot of concerns, particularly about the results management process, the delay in the announcement of the results in some states and the margin of victory in some states, for instance, Ogun, for instance, Kaduna. I'd like you to speak to those states, and specifically to the results management process. What implications, do these results and the protests trailing these results, what does it have for the post-election, atmosphere in the country? Madam Obi, that question is for you.
The question,
yes, it's for you.
Okay. I think the issue of trust deficit is where we're talking about. The IREF, because of technology, I think that's one of the things, because of the age of technology that we're in now, is one of the curious things that we are finding. Why was it that the first election, that's the presidential and the National Assembly election, there was an upload of the National Assembly, results, and then you did not upload the presidential result? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to tell Nigerians? That's a big one. And then we see what has happened, in the governorship and the Houses of Assembly election. Some people are arguing, and that's another healthy environment as well, to say that some people are arguing and they go into the portal and they say, but the result you have on the portal is different from what we are now, announcing. And those are the areas that we're looking at. Much as I will say, if you tell me, because Nigeria has a capacity, I think that's one of the questions that Maupe also asked. Nigeria has more capacity. We do have the capacity to deliver a credible, fair, and free election. But did we? What have we done? Here, I think we deserve more than that. And there are lots of disappointments, but INEC itself is not communicating to Nigerians to tell Nigerians what is happening, except when they are reacting to something. And I think governance should not be like that, because the process is as important. And how you conduct the process is equally very, very important. And so we are having, charade of things, you are having, Abia is one of the typical examples of what is happening. How did you come about by this number? And I think engagement, much as there are disappointments, there are some healthy things that are coming out of the election as well. But for the management of the election by INEC, I'm totally disappointed and heartbroken, because I feel they could have done more. They ought to do more. We were promised more, and they failed in their promise to Nigerians in a lot of ways. But there are some things that are coming out that are healthy. I think there's a lot of lessons that is being learned in this election. And we ask INEC, especially as a woman, for example, I'm looking at Adamawa election, and you are looking at it keenly, where you already have, because people are tabulating the results along. One of the things that INEC needs to know is the essence of giving the polling unit agents copies of the results is because of transparency. And how do we believe in you when you have promised to do this and you are not doing it? And people are finding loopholes. In the past election, they have taken us back for almost 20 years. They are finding loopholes on the INEC guideline. INEC guideline says they can deserve, they can collate as they want. But what did you collect money for? And so these are some of the challenges that we are in, and we hope that we'll be able to come out of this. But they are writing their history as well. Whatever you do is being written in history. Whatever pace but you made a promise you did not deliver in the promise, and that's, we have to hold the INEC chairman and his team responsible.
Speaking of challenges and disappointments, one of the issues coming out from the governorship elections also is the deployment, and this is for you, Mrs. Hassan, coming from the governorship and state assembly elections, is the heavy deployment of security operatives to states in the north, like Jigawa, whereas you have, minimal deployment to states that could have been described as flashpoints, that could throw up challenges like Abia, Ebonyi in the south, even Lagos in the south, where we had quite a number of challenges during the elections. And this is, hugely contrary to what INEC and the Interagency Committee had promised, for the governorship and state assembly elections. How do we then begin to hold the election body to account on all of this on all of these issues arising from this governorship and state assembly elections?
In terms of how they hold elections.
I think that, yeah, there has to be accountability, and accountability will have to be based on evidence. We are very lax when it comes to accountability as a country. Even that is why we are complaining about the impunity that actually played out during polling. Yes, people were arrested. Will they actually be prosecuted? And more, the need for this Electoral Offences Commission will have to be like immediate. It should be immediate. It should be something that will be immediately set to pass. And I think beyond these accountability issues, where people, of course, we have seen in previous elections, we have seen previous coalition officer being jailed. We have seen INEC officials being sent to prison. But what is also important is that it's not just about the judicial form of accountability that actually matters. The important thing is we also need to be spoken to as Nigerians. There is a strong need to clear the air. What exactly happened beyond the issue of using press statements to say that, oh, this is what happens, or that the fact that matters have now become sub judice itself. And when it comes to some of the issues that NA responded to earlier, I think there are two important issues here. Consistency in the application of the law. As a country and as the Electoral Commission, there must be a consistency in the application of the law, and it should actually be across board. The problem of federalism, which we often refer to as a challenge for Nigeria to say, oh, at the top level, this happens. Once it gets to the state or local government level, the context completely changes. Should not be an excuse itself. Then proactive communication is important, not responsive communication. We do not want to hear after the fact. We want to be spoken to, like right on spot, immediately. There must be scenario A, there must be scenario B, there must be scenario C. While in this era of information disorder ourselves, we have reached a point where we must be able to reinstill trust and confidence in the process, because this trust and confidence we are talking about is not just about today, it's not just about these elections, it actually represents the future of democracy itself.
All right, well, we've since been joined by Samson Ito, the Executive Director of YAGA Africa. Good morning, thank you for coming on
Very
today.
Good morning.
Well, what a time it is for these elections. We're just taking a look at all the preparations that went in, the meetings before the time, several meetings, as a matter of fact, and comparing it with the outcome of what happened and how we needed to assess the scenario and steps to take moving forward. So we just thought to find out, from your perspective, how did the elections come across to you? Probably, first of all, broadly speaking.
Well, from a YAGA Africa perspective, it aligns with the position taken by other civil society organizations that these elections were not the elections that Nigerians expected. They were not the elections that Nigerians deserved. And when we make this conclusion, we do so focused on the process and not the outcome. And I think it's important to put that on record, that it isn't about the outcome, it's about the process. And so there are three key evaluative questions that we considered in assessing this election. The first is, was there an independent, well-resourced, and competent electoral commission to administer this election? And if you look at the entire process, first, in the build-up to the election, civil society raised alarm about INEC capture. And when we looked at INEC capture, we focused on the operational independence of the Electoral Commission. Because if you're going to assault the independence of any institution, you attack its operational independence and then its financial independence. And you check the appointment process. And one of the concerns that civil society raised, that you cannot have elections managed by politicians or managed by people who have tainted records. Petitions were submitted to the National Assembly Did the National Assembly perform the due diligence required? So when you see this capture, displayed in the course of the management of the elections at the state, it's an outcome that was expected because some of the resident electoral commissioners who were appointed, they were appointed to do the shoddy job that they did. This commission did plan, in terms of preparations, INEC prepared for this election. But why was it that on the day of election, only 27% of polling units recorded early opening? It tells you that something was fundamentally wrong about the operational and systemic failures. And INEC responded, by suspending 1 or 2 resident electoral commissioners. So it was clear that you had a captured electoral commission in the build-up to this election. The second bit, and colleagues have talked about, the coalition processes. Just look at what happened with the governorship elections and how results were mutilated and altered at coalition level. For a lot of the elections across the state, it was just disappointing that the level of impunity, how results were just altered. You could see videos where people go into coalition centers and hijack the entire process. And I hope that INEC will investigate and prosecute coalition officers that undermined the integrity and subverted the will of the people. I think it's critical. The second dimension of this relates to, how the voters, perform. And I say that regardless of the turnout, we must celebrate citizens' resilience. And you could see that, yes, citizens were disappointed with the conduct of the presidential elections, but they still showed up. They didn't just show up. They didn't keep quiet. They protested. And they complained when the processes were not delivering the expectations. And I think there's something there that we need to build on as we march towards, the post-election period. And thirdly, it's just the role that the security agents played. And if you compare the presidential and the governorship election, you clearly see that the outcomes are completely different in the way security was managed. In the first election, the role that political thugs played, they were somehow contained in some states. But what happened with the governorship elections? Why did the thugs just go on rampage across several states, disrupting the election? So there are questions that, quite frankly, as we reflect on this, we don't have the answers yet. And this is why civil society have called for an independent, audit of this entire process. Yes, INEC will undertake its review, but it's important to incorporate independent evaluation or audit of this election because there are lots of questions that we have that are not yet answered. And for us, as a country, to move forward, those questions have to be answered. We can't gloss over them and just move on and say, oh, yes, the election is over, and so let's move on. No. One way to move on is to first reflect and respond to certain fundamental accountability questions before we move on.
All right, let's bring in my colleague in Lagos. Ayo has got questions as well. Go ahead, please.
Well, thank you, Chamberlain. Mr. Itodo, you actually began from where I would love to, for us all to talk about. We've been raising the issues around these elections. The very issues we're raising now, we have raised them countless times, and it is almost like we are sounding like a scratched record or whichever we want to put it. However, there is something you said that we needed to celebrate. Can we take a few moments to celebrate in what ways we have moved forward a bit in our process? It's been 24 years or so that we've been having these elections. And you talked about something to celebrate in terms of the resilience of the people, the enthusiasm demonstrated over all over the place, between February 25 and March 18 when the elections held. What other things, even in the process, that can you say we should also celebrate and pat ourselves in the back and say, we've done well in these areas. There are countless other ways that we need to make progress, but in these areas we have made a little bit of progress.
I think there are two things. First, a comparison between the presidential and the governorship elections show one thing, that if systems are put in place and they work, they are capable of delivering credible elections. So you look at the electoral technology, and this is, again, our principled position. That technology didn't fail. It is the human beings who were deployed to manage this technology that failed. So you check the BVAS. This was the first time it was deployed at national scale. And both in the presidential and the governorship election, the data shows that the BVAS functioned optimally. So we're hitting as high as 92, 93% functionality rate. And so the issue wasn't about the accreditation. So it did function, and we must celebrate it, because even in the mock accreditation that INEC conducted, it only deployed to about 400 polling units. So if across the 176,606 polling units, you recorded over 95% functionality rate, I think it is success, and Nigerians need to celebrate that. The second sort of, I would say, success, and it ties to the electronic transmission of results. Yes, in the first election, it failed. And when I say it failed, not the technology, but the humans who managed this did fail the system. But if you check the second elections and the governorship elections, results were transmitted online. And if you look at some of the collation centers, the collation officers and the returning officers relied on the results uploaded on the portal. In fact, I saw a Channels TV report where a returning officer declined to accept a hard copy result sheet because there were inconsistencies with the results on the Form EC8A, the hard copy, and that which was transmitted online. Because that's the purpose of the IREV. It was to give the public, an opportunity, to follow the results. So the IREV did work. It delivered on its promise in the governorship election. But when we talk about this, and I think this is one point of reflection about this election, that technology is not a silver bullet. Technology cannot solve all your electoral integrity challenges. It's just a tool. So you need more than technology to deliver credible elections. And a case in point was just the Osun governorship election and the ruling, of the tribunal. It was clear that whilst the BVAS did accredit voters, but in the course of the transmission, in the course of the recording of the data on accreditation figures from the BVAS into the result sheets, there were some errors, and those errors resulted into overvoting. And so we will need more than technology. You need the human beings and the personal integrity of those individuals manning the system for successful elections. I think the third thing that we must celebrate a part of these elections, and I'll say this advisedly, when people assess the election, they look at, some of the strongholds of opposition parties or of ruling parties that have been captured. They look at how they've been, some governors who attempted to come to the National Assembly and they didn't make it. The test of credible elections isn't when the ruling party loses its elections or when an opposition party wins. It doesn't in any way signify that the process is credible. I think it's important to put that on record. That when you check the integrity of elections, it's beyond whether the ruling party lost. It's about the process and whether there was substantial compliance with the guidelines. And I say that the Electoral Act, the current Electoral Act, may have delivered on certain promises, but this is the first time we are implementing this law at a national scale. There will be some shortcomings and some inconsistencies, as we have seen with the misapplication of the provisions of the guidelines and the Act relating to the implications of overvoting and cancellation of votes in the determination of a margin of lead or conclusiveness of elections. And I think there are interpretation issues there, but to a large extent, the Electoral Act did enhance, and it's one thing that we must celebrate. If you look at the financial independence of INEC, that was something that, in the build-up to this election in 2019, 6 months to the election, INEC could only access 60% of its budget. But that's different from the 2023 process. If you also check INEC's power to review the declarations made. We're watching to see how INEC will manage the Abia situation. We understand that the process will conclude today, but how INEC implements this power given to the commission to review results declared either under duress or in contravention of the Electoral Act is something that, we hope to see and how INEC delivers on this. So there have been some positives, but quite frankly, these were not the elections that Nigerians deserved, and these were not the elections that Nigerians expected.
Well, thank you, Mr. Tode. Let me ask the same question of Madam Obi, just to find out if there is anything to cheer. It's been 24 years. I know, everyone, a good number of people, even including those who are looking at only the positives, know that there are areas of improvement, but know that there are areas that need improving. But what areas can we celebrate now that you have seen beyond some of the issues that Mr. Itodo has mentioned?
I think, for us, we celebrate the courage and the resilience of Nigerians. I really could not believe the kind of turnout that we had during the presidential and National Assembly elections. Despite the cash swap and all of the sufferings that were meted to Nigerians at that time, for them to be able to turn out en masse. But one thing that is very, very important is that, we have called for the audit of the polling units, because one thing is about releasing the money. The other thing is whether you did the job for which you were given the money for. If you were supposed to, you made a promise to conduct election in the 176,606 polling units, and so many Nigerians were disenfranchised because even at the closing of poll, many people had not, on the 25th of February, many polling units had not opened. INEC promised to go back to the places where elections were not conducted. The following day, many of them never saw INEC. So we need an audit of that process. Celebrating, too, is some houses of assembly. For example, in Taraba, we have 2 women who have gone into the state houses of assembly and from different political parties. That celebration, that resilience. But you see the question of trust that was flawed, at the presidential election. You saw that the turnout, everybody was like, okay, let them go and count the elections. I think that credibility. At the National Collation Center, during the presidential, questions were asked to the INEC chairman, severally, and I was there and I was watching. What happened to IREV? He never said anything. He said, I will respond. I will respond tomorrow. He never responded. And like Idai had pointed out, timely intervention. You made a promise. You not only made a promise in Nigeria. You went to Chatham House. You made a promise. But you used a loophole with the INEC guideline to truncate, the election more or less. So many of the things. Yes, also Samson pointed out that some people won elections, some people lost elections that otherwise would not have been, pulled out. But again, we see another time when journalists were violated, journalists, the kind of brutality that were meted to journalists. And where you also see, for the civil society organization, in Adamawa, for example, before the election, the governor suspended all, NGOs. He said the activities of, including the UN, all NGOs that they don't want any, suspended operations, he said, until. And when you see that, it becomes a red flag. And we must also say that there were hotspots, during the election. There were hotspots that the security agencies ought to have noted that these areas were hotspots. The fact that you deployed massively and you were looking the other way when it was time to protect people, how did we get it so bad? Because we are talking about INEC, we also have to talk about the police and the security agencies that were giving money for them to deploy to all of the polling units, as a process of accountability. And so we will celebrate the fact that Nigerians are resilient, and I'm asking Nigerians not to be discouraged because I see some of videos that are saying Nigerians are tearing their passports and so on and so forth. Don't give up on your country. This is one of the greatest countries in the world, and we must continue. Those who are not, and we're talking about failure of the machines, for example. If beavers were okay and human elements made the beavers not to perform to the way it should have, who has been fired in INEC? Nobody has, you know, you can talk about the suspension of Abia Rec and then the Sokoto and so on and so forth. But within the control of the beavers' environment itself, who has been sacked? Who has been disciplined? Well, we have to stop the impunity. And if INEC feels they cannot discipline anybody, then the chairman should find a way to get out of the commission.
Well, thank you so much, madam. But let me ask the same question of Mrs. Hazen, because, I mean, INEC spends 355 billion naira, but is there nothing at all to celebrate? Was it all bad?
I think really for me, the biggest people to celebrate in these elections, the winners are actually the voters of this country. They are Nigerians. It's their resilience that day to troop out to vote. And even in spite of the challenges experienced with the February 25th elections, which diminished trust in the whole process in several states of the Federation, instead, turnout actually improved from the presidential elections, telling us again that politics is local and people are ready to be involved in this process. And you would even see that in places where violence were being instrumentalized, people still consistently attempted to vote. We saw voters themselves in places like Ondo, with poor deployment, push out political talks from the polling unit. In the same way, we saw them in the middle of the night in Kano, escorting their ballot to the collation center and staying with this ballot. We saw increased role, in fact, in the sophistication of citizens. This is not about outcome. We at the CDD are very, very interested and focused really on the processes that generate the outcome, because legitimizing outcome when processes are completely flawed will not actually be the way, nor will it actually increase citizens' trust in the process or the agency they actually feel. But when you look at it again, from the way the citizens acted in these elections, they were able to show us that performance also matters. And that is why we saw upset in some parts of the country, not because people were elected out or it's not a sign of manipulation. You start asking when you actually have a majority state and you find that a particular person is not voted for. Nigerians were basically rejecting those persons. They weren't rejecting the parties. And when you do a deep dive to look at the figures holistically, you look at the data, you see it is actually a rejection of personalities. We spoke to people who said for them it's also performance. And this performance will actually trump gratification, which worked in some instances itself. But this performance that has made citizens and even politicians to realize that finally, you don't have to belong to the mainstream party to win votes. You don't have to belong to the mainstream party to actually get elected. And that citizens themselves can now even identify symbols, party symbols and logo, which they previously were not aware of. Thank you. But I want to add two things to what Samson said when it comes to INEC. Now, the issue of INEC is not just the appointment process. What we have learned from this election is that competence is indeed important. And timing have also become extremely important. So it's one thing to actually capture and put in political actors. It's another thing for them to be competent. So you see that all along, the competence level of some of these people were new. You tell people who have not actually managed 20 people to manage a behemoth operation as INEC. Some of us had to manage more than 5,000 observers, more than 100 people working in the center, aside from analysts that put this together. Then when you allow people who will lead the elections to go in like 3 months into the elections, how are they able to settle?
Indeed, and I hope that INEC will take note of, some of these points that you have noted. Mr. Itodo, I know that you say that technology is not necessarily the silver bullet that Nigeria needs, to guarantee the integrity of her electoral process. But then again, perhaps if we could eliminate the human element that you talk about, because a huge portion of the challenges that we had during the presidential and state elections came from the human element, be it the collation process or the challenge of voter suppression at the voting levels. It was the human element that was the challenge. And I had asked this of INEC officials prior to the elections, that why do we still need the collation centers, given the introduction of the BVAS and the guarantee of electronic transmission of the results in the Electoral Act as amended 2022. So would we have eliminated those big sticking points of voter suppression, attack on INEC offices during the transfer of election results from the polling unit level to the local government, if we eliminated the collation centers at that level, since we're already, in the regime of electronic transmission of results?
Well, again, Bukola, before I respond to that question, and you said some of the points raised about competencies is within INEC's remit. I think it's beyond INEC. It's the president who has the power to appoint these people. It's the National Assembly, in particular the Senate, with the constitutional competence to confirm these appointments. And so when you have a committee on INEC invite these people and scrutinizes their nominations, what do they check? And I think, so beyond INEC, it's also about, the National Assembly. And these are issues that, the government should take into consideration. For INEC, its internal deployments are also critical, and collation officers that it appoints both ad hoc and permanent staff. But to the point about the human element, and should we eliminate this collation level? First, to do that, you need to change the law. You need to change the Electoral Act, because these different levels of collation have been structured within our legal framework. And you know that if you look at the different levels, there are about 5 levels depending on the election. So from the polling units to the ward level, what we have seen, the ward level is it's the weakest. And often, and even in the governorship elections, some of the collation was concluded at the local government level. If you go to the ward level collation, these ward level collation centers are public places like schools. And so when we talk about the fact that you can have better elections if the context for the conduct of the election isn't improved and the infrastructure isn't existent for the conduct of this process. So those are schools, primary or secondary schools. Do these schools have electricity? And if you check one of the statements from INEC, we're raising flags that some of the resident electoral commissioners and EOs didn't deploy generators to those collation centers, making it difficult for the collation to proceed in the night. So I think that ward level, perhaps if you eliminate that ward level and take the collation to the local government level, are you going to be able to manage, the quantum of sheets of papers and result sheets that come from the polling unit? So these are reflections that we would need to have. But when you talk about transmission, it's important to note that within our electoral system or management framework, the transmission of results, is electronic, but you still have manual collation. And this manual collation enables, these sheets of papers that come from the polling units concentrated in one particular center and have them collated. Now, note that you only collate presidential elections. The final collation is at the FCT. But the other levels happen at the state. So you still need to have an element of manual collation, because you can't surrender your entire electoral process to technology. You have to provide an alternative. And this is the rationale behind, this merger between the manual and electronic transmission of results. So my view is, yes, we need to review, you know, the collation process. But at the end of the day, if you limit collation officers to academics, we've seen that academics are also corruptible because they are professors and PhD holders who manage this collation. What happened in some states is unacceptable. If those individuals are the ones tutoring our students and our kids in school, then every Nigerian should be worried because these are people who have questionable character. If a lecturer can rig election, I wonder what he's teaching his students. You know, in the school.
It's tantamount to a disgrace to the school that they're teaching, really, unapologetically so, because if that's a product that they have, and some of them are professors, and then you wonder, what are they professing? But, you know, let's talk about a little bit about recommendations moving forward. I mean, several CSOs, you all have written them out here. But I see this, let me start with you. Establish an independent committee like the US Electoral Reform Committee to look into improvements of election management in the country. So how is this going to pan out? How should we go about this?
I think a lot will have to go about it. If you take technology as an instance, there is what we call human interference in technology as well. And in the era of diabolic politics, first going back to the last question, the response, the increased rate of violence we actually saw in these elections was in direct response to the technology itself. Because with BVAS, what it meant that the conventional means of actually rigging elections were no longer applicable. And even where it will be, it can easily be discernible by the time you actually get to the court itself. So you have to use your unconventional and both non-conventional means to suppress voters itself. But when we start talking in terms of reform, we have seen that reforms have worked. We've seen that we have a new electoral act. But we still see that there are challenges. And we have also seen that institutions have become extremely critical when it comes to elections, not just the election management body, but every other form of institution, even including the media. So having an audit of the elections and having something akin to the Waste Panel Committee report, not, yes, we had the nominee committee itself some years back, which takes a very holistic approach of these elections, especially at this point where we are. It's not just an audit, but tries to actually crack the challenges that we are currently facing within our own electoral process. So we don't just want to go to a committee that we say, this is A, that we solve B. But how does it actually intermingle and how that B can actually be and what institution will deal with that?
What I found interesting was this one where you said they should establish a political parties regulatory commission.
Yeah.
I mean, we thought INEC already did that.
INEC is overburdened, obviously.
Why
I think
do we
the
need
truth
that?
must actually be told. We have reached a point where we know now that INEC is actually overburdened in the handling of elections. It handles elections, it monitors political parties, it monitors campaign financing, it prosecutes electoral offences, tribunal. It does everything. And the best practices in other countries is that some of the conduct of political parties, if elections are not just what happened that happens on election day, you will see that it is relevant that the conduct of political parties, the action of political parties, even the kind of hate campaign they launched that led to into these elections and gave us this polluted ecosystem where we are actually operating in, where certain facts from fiction has become extremely important, would possibly have been dealt with if you have a system that works, if you have a system that monitors who does what, when they do it, and they are actually held to account at every level. And it even goes beyond that.
Do other countries have that?
Yes, everywhere. Even little Sierra Leone has got that, really. So it's actually one of the structure that you find in elections. And across the world, now it's not just using the United States as actually the benchmark. If you take Ghana, in Ghana, for instance, all of us would have had the opportunity to vote ahead of the elections instead of us losing our vote. In the United States, they have early voting, they have postal voting, they have different ways such that that behemoth exercise that we see on the day of elections is actually reduced. And people is not just one body seated in Abuja talking about the problem of federalism that we have continued to encounter, that will do this gigantic process when we have not, which we have not been able to fix for the last 24 years.
A number of issues stick out for me. Samson has spoken about INEC capture, which is a very big issue. Idayat has spoken about competence versus sometimes it's different. It's difficult to know whether it was outright corruption or just basic lack of competence. But what is common in many instances is a missing standard of values, which some people have said stuck out for them in these elections. When you compare the presidential elections with the governorship elections, some people will say that we saw marked improvement in terms of how technology was deployed, in terms of sort of the standards that were supposed to be seen in an election. For instance, materials were deployed on time, people came to the polling units on time, etc. But largely, it would seem that in spite of this little improvements which we had pointed out in the presidential elections, the governorship elections left some people feeling even more downcast than the presidential elections. I don't know how you saw that, and some people have actually pointed down to values. We can regulate everything. Where do we start building values from?
I think the issue of values has also to do with the quality of citizenship of Nigerians. Because the citizens, don't look at the voters alone. The citizens that are manning the machines, very, very important. What are the principles that are guiding them? And that's why, you know, we, from the civil society, and I want to celebrate the civil society. My colleagues here, I celebrate them for the hard work. And all of the civil society members that are still out there trying to mobilize people to ensure that they capture their mandate. You know, if you use things to your own advantage, and that's why we look at the Mahmoud that conducted that election is not the Mahmoud we went into the election with. And so we begin to wonder, like, you know, Samson pointed out, you know,
why do you say
the
so,
system, because he was somebody we believed in. He's one of the most accessible in terms of a leader, a chairman of INEC. You know, all of us here, we can assess him very easily. And he will respond, very intelligent person. So what happened? Why is he not? It's like when he was announcing the results, it's like somebody, was it that somebody, you know, and whatever is happening behind the scene will come out someday. Because we believed in him. All he said, we believed. And that's what we're saying, that what really happened leaves you bewildered. What is happening in this environment? And why are the staff? Well, the issue of impunity, we really need to look at it. Why is nobody being sacked at the technical level? If beavers are functioning at that level, is the first time that the beavers was deployed massively, and so it worked, and then the personnel did not work, and then you go to the security, where is the level of, it seems some complicitness in some level when you are looking at what really happened. Why would the police and the security agencies be in places and then they turn around? You know, they are not working, they are not looking at what is happening. But the independency of INEC itself, we need to look at it. The INEC chairman did not have anything to do with the recs, you know, in terms of appointment. And how many gender representation is another thing that we need to talk about. It's very, very important for if you are going to have an independent INEC, he needs to also be able to be part of the regs that are being implemented. And we need to look at Justice Uwe's commission. You know, we need to look at the recommendations. Okay. We need to be able to celebrate, you know, the media, the work they have done. But in terms of principles, what are the values of INEC? The independency, the individuality, and the partisanship. That's why civil society, we cried out when some people were nominated. But we need to now get back to the reflections of what we do thereafter.
Okay,
what
we've also seen recommendations from Yaga, one of which is that INEC should, in line with Section 64 of the 2022 Electoral Act, review cases where legitimate concerns have been raised on the conduct and declarations made by coalition and returning officers, especially instances where result declarations contravene the electoral legal framework. So that is already out there. But now, implementing that appears to be a challenge. So several things to actually look at for this election. So you just wonder. But it is a conversation that will not go away. We've by no means scratched the surface. We will stay on all of this as much as we can, because we couldn't have spent 355 billion naira for this. I think Nigerians deserve a lot more answers from the Commission, and we don't know if INEC will deserve an increase of their budget next time out. But those are subsequent conversations that we will have moving forward, because accountability in all of this is key. So I'd like to thank you all for coming on today. Idai Hassan, Director, Center for Democracy and Development. Samson Itodo, Executive Director, Yaga Africa, NOB Convener, Situation Room, and Country Director, Action Aid. Thank you all. Well done, and all the best.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
We will be back in a moment. Stay with us.
I'm part of ranking, and they don't call me world best for no reason. I only deal with the best. Be it auto or business, 100% claim is always guaranteed.
Welcome to world-class insurance services. We are Anchor Insurance,
where insurance truly works.
Are you worried about no security? Have you been a victim of crime? Worry no more. The Ministry of Interior, in conjunction with other security agencies, bring you N-Alert, an app that puts you in charge. N-Alert mobile app enables citizens to report emergencies and criminal activities to the internal security agencies for quick response. Now, with the N-Alert app, you can report crime, disasters, and other emergencies, such as fire outbreak, road accidents, student gender-based violence, jail attacks, vandalism of critical national assets, passport racketeering, and you can even monitor elections and lots more. Simply download the N-Alert app on the iOS App Store or Google Play Store to register, or dial 0800 Interior toll-free to report. Now, if you see something, do an alert.
Ladies and gentlemen,
you see as it be now, they call me but no be me show. That's how some business owners will have a different name on their business account from the actual business name. Listen, don't let your customers be suspicious of your business. Sign up a business account with Money Points and get an account in your business name in minutes.
Whatever it takes to make sure you have a business account opened in your business name, we'll do it as your sure banker. Open a bank account in your business name with Money Point.
The Divine Hand of God Prophetic Ministries International invites you to Breaking Generational Curses, a special program that sets you on a path to your desired settlement in life. It's happening on Saturday, the 25th of March, 2023. Time, 9 a.m. at the Divine Hand of God Church Auditorium, number 638, Durumi District, Gerki Area 1, Abuja. Miracles, signs, and wonders will abound through the ministrations of God's servants, Prophet Emmanuel Omale and Pastor Dr. Deborah Emmanuel Omale.
Are you in trouble? Are you sick? Are you from this family that there's no development? Coming to this service, you are living with generational blessing. Any cause at all that have been on your head, as you come for this service, your life will turn around. Come believing in God, and your life will never remain the same. The Lord bless you. Be my guest.
For more information, call 080-3848-5929. You can also join us live on Divine Hand Television on any free-to-air decoder. The Lord bless you.
want to come and tell you something that is not authenticated. This is a fact, and I want everybody to know. Tomorrow, Thursday, by 11, they will be here. And of course, they are armed criminals under the leadership of a criminal who has killed 16 people. People burnt and shot. 16. He's their leader. They are coming in tomorrow. Only God knows what they will do. Because there is no price. Somebody who killed people. I never seen this in my life. Somebody who came out with all the evidences to have killed.
To be specific, who is this somebody?
I don't have to mention names. My level is beyond them. They are still far behind politically. Well, but who doesn't know the people, the person in this country? Nobody. I mean, everybody knows. So they will lead. They will come and kill and maim people because they believe nothing will happen. And I think that will be too dangerous for somebody to bring criminals, armed thugs, 50 full load of vehicles, buses, times 40 for local governments to Kano, to protest, to show that the Kano people don't want the judgment. Now, Kano people, you know, we are opposition. We cannot go and rig anything. All those votes are real. The votes of the Gandujia in Kano were fake. These are votes purchased. These were votes that they manufactured. And now we are saying the over 1 million people are not happy. It's only the fake ones that they are coming to show. So I believe that many people are still making mistakes. And I think the earlier they understand peace is much better than any other interest, the better.
Well, sir, I believe you informed the security agencies. Are you confident that they can be able to counter this planned attack? And if they couldn't, what do you plan to do to make sure that your people are protected?
Welcome back. We've got two gentlemen joining us to weigh in on what is going on in Kano. Abdullahi Fage is a legal advisor for the ABC, and Omar Haruna Dogowa is the NNPP state chairman for Kano State. Gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program today. Let me start with you, Mr. Dogowa. Yes, your party has been declared winner of that election, but the reactions coming through, and they are accusing the party. In fact, they say that your victory should not and cannot be considered as a victory of such, because there are so many things that should not have been done but was done, and as such you shouldn't glory in the victory that the commission has declared at the moment. What is your reaction to that?
Shukran Rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Well, let me first of all thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here with you this morning. Well, before I answer your question, let me just take you back to a little history. You know, what is happening is not surprising, because that's what it should have happened normally. If you defeat somebody in a war, definitely he will start bringing up excuses and other things like that. But just recently we had an election, and for your information, you should know that we have 44 local government in Kano State. We have 484 wards in Kano State. They have councillors in all these wards. They have supervisory councillors in all these wards, 10 of our per ward. And they have local government chairmen, they have commissioners, they have government, they have every power. And we had an election. Out of the 3 senators in Kano, we won 2. Out of the 24 members of the House of Representatives, we have now 17. And we are contesting some. And the following week, and even the presidential election, we are far ahead of them. We nearly doubled them in terms of number of votes. And we are here this week, and an election was conducted. And a reflection of that last election was played here again. And people are still complaining. Well, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. Normally, that's what they should do. That's what they should say. But I'm assuring you that this victory came from hard work, tenacity, and real politicking. For somebody to come and start saying that maybe INEC shouldn't have done what they did, it's left for him. If he accepted the result, fine. If he didn't accept it, for him to go to court. But for him to come and start arguing and even trying to maybe do things that will jeopardize the peace of the state, I don't think that one is the right thing. In 2003, to be precise, our leader contested for an election and lost. And he went straight to the house of the person that defeated him in the election and congratulated him. You know, it takes real faith. It takes somebody with real faith from the heart to accept defeat in an election. Somebody that really have human feelings is somebody that will say, yes, I've accepted that defeat as a genuine one. So what the APC is doing in Kano is just playing to the gallery. Now that they have federal government, they want to do this so that they will have appointment. We know what they are doing. We know what they are doing. For your information, I was the pioneer APC chairman in Kano State. I campaigned and took Gandhi to government house. I was his chairman. I took him to government house. So I know him very well. I know his antecedent. I know what he can do, and I know what he cannot do. These things are all his play cards. He can play them, and more coming. So when they are saying that the deal, we didn't win it, he didn't win in his ward. He didn't win in his polling unit. So what are you talking about? Where is the rigging? What is it that they want to, that we didn't do? So it's just like normal thing that a Nigerian or in Nigeria, in politics, some people, when they fail an election, they have to come with excuses. So for me, the election is clean, clear, it has been declared. And if anybody has any issue, let him move to the court.
Mr. Fage, let me bring you in as a legal advisor to the party. You heard some of the comments he made there that you know the process, what needs to be done. The next stage is to go to court. But when he then says that members of your party are accused of what? Stoking the flame, trying to encourage people to hit the streets in protest, that, he says, is unbecoming. So from your perspective, for those who think that the victory was a long time coming, haven't seen how the presidential elections went, it was only natural that this happens looking at it from a distance. What do you have to say to them?
Well, thank you very much, Sharon. Good morning all. Well, a rider to that, you know, in an electioneering generally, when the election has been conducted, and at the end of the day, a winners emerge. In particular, this one, the gubernatorial election. And after the emergence of the winner as a result of the collation of results, declaration, are returned. Of course, as we all know, election is a process. And in the process of doing so, there are so many issues that may arise. One is the issue of how the election was conducted. And after it has been conducted, how the issue of the result that was collated, after the collation of all the results, the returning officers of respective constituencies, in Kano in particular, the 44 local governments, they are representative of INEC, and they will come to INEC and present the results in the forms prescribed for that. And they did so. And in doing so, it is clear, even from the result, it is clear the result which the returning officers presented at INEC, that there were wide margin of lead between the two contesting candidates. And that margin is only 128,897. While from their presentation, there were cancellations which ranged from 273,442 from the result presented by their returning officers, which presupposes that there were anomalies in almost all the 44 local government from what INEC presented. And with this, it is clear that there is need for a rerun election. Why? Because it is clear the result from the 44 local governments presented, there were these irregularities, there were this overvoting, there were this violence, which resulted to cancellation of all these figures. And it is on that basis, yesterday we called for press conference and we issued a press release rejecting the result on this basis, specifically on the fact that there was this issue of cancellation. The election ought not to be declared. The winner ought not to be declared because the election ought to be declared inconclusive because of the afferent presentation by the returning officers of the respective polling unit. And it is on this premise we now call on our people, the members of our political parties, the supporters of APC in Kano, and all well-meaning Nigerian and Kano people to come and present the protest at the INEC office today, just to protest, peaceful protest, that this is exactly what transpired during the conduct of the election.
Stefage, I'm afraid I'll have to interrupt you at that point. Because some people will say that you know the process. You're a lawyer. You're even the Attorney General of the state. And you've seen how the processes have gone, you know, almost at all levels. And what those who are aggrieved have been asked to do. They've been asked to, you know, seek legal redress. And that's the rightful place for this to be determined. Some people have said, you know, when it comes to the issue of fraud, which is what you are alleging here in terms of how the collation has gone on, that the only place where this can be proven is in the court of law. You don't agree with that?
First of all, I'm not the Attorney General of Kano State. I'm the state legal advisor of the party, that is APC. That is one. Then for the addressing these issues to the appropriate venue, as we all know, yesterday I made it known to the whole world that we already written our protest pursuant to Section 65 of the Electoral Act 2022, calling for the review within 7 days as stipulated by our extant laws, regulation guidelines, and specifically Electoral Act. And this is clearly complying with the external laws, because instead of doing any other thing, we decided to write that letter for review within 7 days, which is normally do in an election. And even here in Kano, for Dogwa Tudunwada Federal Constituency, after declaration of the majority leader as the winner of that election, after about 8 to 9 days, the INEC, after reviewing based on the letter written by the NNPP, they reviewed that election, declaration are returned, and later they declare that election inconclusive and order for rerun of the election in that area. And it's in Kano, and it's, during this dispensation, it's just 3 weeks back. That is this. And for peaceful protest, I'm unaware of any law that prohibit, that bar conducting peaceful protests. So, and for the other thing, as I said earlier, we have written to the INEC to review within the stipulated period, taking into consideration the margin of lead and the cancellation, which is about 300,000 cancellation, some as a result of violence, some as a result of overvoting. So I
from Kano, thank you for the clarification that you're not the Attorney General, you're the legal advisor to your political party in Kano State. And, you know, you're a lawyer, and as such, you know what the processes are. You have written right now for a review, which is well within your rights and is supported by the Electoral Act, saying that the INEC can review within 7 days. But what I am yet to understand is what you want the protest to achieve. What are you hoping that the protest will achieve? This is in a state where, after the winner was declared, the state government, set a curfew, asking people to stay in their homes. We saw that, even though the curfew was complied with in breach because people still came out on the streets to celebrate, it does have the potential. Things could go out of hand. Some people said, things can go out of hand easily. You know the state where you're from. What exactly are you hoping that the protest will achieve, even after you've gone through the legal processes as supported by the Electoral Act and the Constitution?
I'm very grateful for this question. You see, that's why, in fact, about 2-3 weeks away, I had an interview with Deutsche Welle. I made it known to the whole world that we are calling for our people to remain calm, to be peaceful and law-abiding. It's there everywhere. And in fact, despite the imposition of the curfew in Kano, immediately after the declaration or return, you see what the supporters of NNPP or members of NNPP, they were all on the street, causing mayhem, arson, destruction of properties of members of APC and other well-meaning Kano people without any cause, despite the imposition of the curfew. That is number one. Then number two, for the curfew, it has already been lifted yesterday. I know, I'm sure, I know of that. It has already been lifted. That is number two. Number three, as I said earlier, is peaceful protest. It's peaceful protest. Nobody will even hold that our symbol of broom. We will all go there.
Yeah, just hang on a minute. Let me bring in Omar Haruna because of our time. So.
Because you say, why this protest?
Okay, just hold on, Mr. Fage, hold on. Let's bring in Mr. Haruna to respond to some of what you said. So, Mr. Haruna, let me ask you. He says peaceful protest. Is there anything wrong with a peaceful protest, in addition to your response to what he says? Go ahead to respond to that.
There is nothing wrong in a peaceful protest. There is nothing wrong with that. And let me also inform you that we have already sent a letter to the Nigerian police. We are also holding our own tomorrow. And let me tell you what they want to achieve with that protest. They want, because when we won our election, they imposed curfew to make sure that nobody comes out to celebrate. That is the aim. Now, the second standard is that they are going to protest today. They have already sent money to local governments to hire bosses. I think 50-50. They will bring in people protest so that they will show the world that they still control Kano. Now, we don't have any problem with that. We can also organize our own, and we are organizing our own tomorrow. But let me just tell you a little story, very little story that may interest you. You see, there was this history or story that two women happened to live in the same maternity home. And both women gave birth to male child the same night. But one of them, unknown to her, stumbled on the child, the newly born child, and he died. So in the morning, they were quarreling. Everyone was claiming that the one that died is your own, not my own. So they went to a jury, and the jury now asked them, what do you want? Say, we want you to identify the real mother of this child. And one of them was very vehement that that child is her own. So the jury now bring out a very sharp knife and give to the first woman and say, okay, now that you didn't agree, she didn't agree, divide it into two, so that one will take the other one, one will take the other part. She drew a knife and they instead of me to buy this child into two, let her take. The other one was even not willing to take the child. She's saying, let me divide it into two. This is the case that is happening now in Kano. Who's saying we want an election? They are saying no. They want the election to be declared inconclusive. Why? Why don't they fight for the election to be declared in favor of them? Because they know it's not their own. They know they didn't win the election. They know we won the election. And the records are there, like you said rightly. We won in the first time of the election. We have 2 senators. We have 17 out of the 24 members of the House of Representatives. And we won the presidential election. 3 elections consecutively carried on the same date. And we won all of them. And when they are talking about violence, that we are election violence, the police are there, they can clarify. When this election is about to hold, We hold so many press conferences, including channels. They cover our press conference. We are claiming that, yes, these sorts of people were imported to come and cause mayhem here in Kano. And even the police certify our stand. They say, yes, they are import. And they made arrest. Let them now come out and say who and who they arrest and who imported them. And even the issue of violence in all these words that I tell you that is mentioning. Why this violence? Who caused it? Why is this violence? Who caused it? They caused it. They did it intentionally because they enjoyed 2019 with inconclusive elections. They want a repeat performance. Why should a government, why should a government that receive federation account grant every month, why should a government that collect?
Let me ask you now, in fact, this is for both of you to respond. And if you can respond to it in less than a minute, because we need to wind down. Mr. Haruna, just hold on. Hold on, Mr. Haruna, just a minute. We need to bring in Mr. Fage as we close on this matter. Mr. Fage, tell us now, for the APC, both of you are planning your protests in the state that is already tensed, that many are saying, look, those people who you are calling to come out and protest may, and in many cases, will misunderstand the essence of this protest, and it could be volatile. So, in that light, Mr. Fage, starting with you, a lot will depend on if this protest goes ahead and holds, and security agencies allow it to hold, then the NNPP will look to that and feel, okay, if you held your protest, nobody stopped you, we will hold our protest. And if NNPP hold their protest and the police come in, they may react differently. So at this point, don't you think that you've already started exploring the legal process as required by law? Why come out with a peaceful protest, especially when some members of your party at the national level spoke against some persons or parties who also protested to INEC, saying it's been won and lost, move on and go to the courts? Do you still think that there will be need to protest, especially if you do yours, NNPP says we will also do ours?
You know.
Yeah, that's for you. Go ahead. Brief.
Okay. You know, first of all, as I said earlier, the protest is peaceful as it was designed to take place. That's number one. Then, number two, the issue of the already have a preparation of conducting this tomorrow. You know, the issue of having peaceful protests is within the ambit of the security agencies to assess and see whether it is worthy of being allowed to take place. And that can be perfectly answered by the security agencies, because I believe before any protest, peaceful or otherwise,
Fage, thank you very much. I know you appreciate why I need to just butt in. Mr. Haruna, briefly as well, do you think that there will be need to proceed with the protest because it could turn volatile?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, let me just conclude my own that other part.
Just answer so we can go. We're out of time.
Okay. Now, for me, it's like if you have a twin brother, whenever your father gives him something, you expect the father to give the same thing to another guy too. So we are now saying that if APC is allowed to conduct or to hold a peaceful protest today, then definitely we have no reason why, because we have already reached to the police. So we are also holding our own tomorrow. So people will now judge who is more peaceful, who has the population, who has the Kano, and everything like that. If they are holding their own today, I'm assuring you that our own will go on tomorrow. And definitely, if they are only peaceful, our own will definitely.
We'll have to thank both of you for coming on. Omar Haruna, the state chairman of NNPP Kano State, and Abdullah Fage, legal advisor, APC Kano State. Thank you for coming on, both of you, and we hope that the parties will see reason, because peace and safety of the residents is far much more important than the interests of politicians, because you say you want to serve the people. Well, that is the show, that segment. Do we have time to take a couple of messages, guys? I'm not sure now. Let me just have a quick look.
I think we're out of time.
Okay. EGK says we can do so much with our current technology. Collation centers are redundant. The only time for manual collation should be at the polling unit. Everything onwards should be automated. The indelible ink is no longer required. The PVC is redundant, he says.
Well, we see your tweets, Professor Emo Noka Enahena. We also see Vitalis Najezi and Henry Okeke. Well,
all right, so unfortunately, we can't. Well, at the time, we do appreciate all of you, and thank you, as always, for sending in your messages. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm Chamberlain, so have a very good day.
Thank you for watching. I'm Maukwe Yusuf.
Thank you for your feedback. Hopefully you get some cash this week. I am Bukola Samuel.
You just have to go there. Amaya Makinde, stay at peace.
Tune in to Just Nigeria and get the lowdown on the issues that really matter.
You have the world at your fingertips.
Check out the Nigerians shaping the future at home and around the world.
What inspired the film was my life story.
And hear from those voices without a platform.
That I lost my brother.
This is your country.
Anything you set your mind to, you can bring to life.
This is Just Nigeria, a partnership between the BBC and Channels TV every Wednesday at 9 p.m.